hype. Pipe, quote. There exists a grand deception at the heart of modern ambition, a cognitive virus that infects the minds of the driven, the intelligent, and the aspiring elite. It's a silent killer of fortunes, a saboteur of potential, cloaked in the virtuous language of productivity and progress. This deception is the cult of action. It's the deeply ingrained, almost biological belief that movement is synonymous with achievement, that activity is a proxy for value, and that the greatest sin an ambitious person can commit is to be caught, for even a moment, doing nothing. We are conditioned from our first day of school to our last day in the boardroom to equate a full calendar with a full life, a flurry of motion with forward momentum. The world screams at you: innovate, pivot, disrupt, hustle, grow, scale, act now. The pressure is immense, a psychological gravity that pulls even the most brilliant minds into its orbit, compelling them to make a move, any move, rather than face the discomfort of stillness. But what if this entire paradigm is wrong? What if the relentless pursuit of action is not the path to elite performance, but the single greatest barrier to it? What if the secret to building an unassailable fortune and a life of profound impact lies not in the quality of your actions, but in the brutal, surgical, and systematic elimination of almost all of them? This is the paradox that separates the merely successful from the titans of history. And no one in modern history has embodied this paradox more completely or more profitably than Warren Buffett. While the rest of the world scrambles in a frenzy of activity, Buffett has built an empire of over $800 billion on a foundation of profound, disciplined, and often excruciatingly patient inaction. His career is not a highlight reel of 1,000 clever trades. It is a monument to a few, rare, obvious decisions, separated by years, sometimes decades, of what the world would call idleness. He has made his fortune not by being the busiest man in the room, but by being the most discerning. He understands a secret that the cult of action cannot comprehend, that in a world saturated with information and opportunity, the scarcest resource is not capital, but cognitive clarity. And the greatest enemy of that clarity is the compulsive need to do something. The story that best illustrates this fatal human flaw, the siren song of action, didn't happen in Omaha, Nebraska. It happened in the glass towers of New York, at the dizzying peak of the greatest technological revolution in a century. It's the story of the AOL-Time Warner merger, a $287 billion catastrophe born from this exact psychological poison. At the turn of the millennium, both AOL and Time Warner were titans in their respective domains. Time Warner was the old media king, a behemoth of content with properties like CNN, HBO, and Warner Brothers. AOL was the new media messiah, the gateway to the internet for millions, a company whose stock had soared to celestial heights on the promise of the digital future. Both companies were led by intelligent, celebrated, and deeply ambitious men. Steve Case at AOL and Gerald Levin at Time Warner, and both were infected by the action virus. They felt the immense pressure of the changing landscape. Time Warner, the old guard, feared being left behind, becoming a dinosaur in the new digital age. AOL, the new power, feared its own fleeting relevance, knowing its dial-up dominance wouldn't last forever. They needed to do something. Something big, something bold, something that would dominate the headlines and secure their legacies. The result was a merger of biblical proportions, a deal hailed by the media as a visionary masterpiece that would define the 21st century. It was the ultimate action. It was also, from a standing start, the single most destructive corporate decision in history. Why? Because it was a decision driven not by logic but by fear. Fear of inaction. Fear of being left behind. Fear of looking stagnant. The supposed synergies were a fantasy, the corporate cultures were immiscible, and the financial logic was built on the sand of a wildly inflated stock bubble. In the aftermath, the combined company lost nearly $200 billion in value. It was a bonfire of capital so vast it's difficult to comprehend. Tens of thousands of jobs were lost. Legacies were shattered. The visionary masterpiece was exposed as a desperate, ill-conceived grasp for relevance. The leaders had mistaken motion for progress. They had answered the siren call of action and sailed their ships directly onto the rocks. And where was Warren Buffett during this frenzy? He was in Omaha, reading, thinking, and, most importantly, doing nothing. He was sitting on billions of dollars in cash, watching the dot-com mania unfold. Wall Street analysts and financial journalists openly mocked him. They called him a dinosaur, a man who, quote, didn't get it. His value investing principles were declared obsolete in the new economy. The pressure on him to act, to join the party, to prove he wasn't washed up, was suffocating. But Buffett refused. He watched as companies with no profits and no plausible business models soared to valuations that defied gravity, and he simply said, I don't know. He admitted, publicly and without shame, that he could not predict the future of these companies. They were outside his area of understanding. So he put them in a mental pile he famously calls his too hard pile, and he waited. His inaction was not passive, it was an aggressive, offensive strategy. He was preserving his capital, but more importantly, he was preserving his cognitive clarity. While the leaders of AOL and Time Warner were caught in a whirlwind of meetings, presentations, and ego-driven negotiations, burning through their mental and financial resources, Buffett was calmly fortifying his position, waiting for the inevitable moment when the mania would break, when fear would replace greed, and when prices would return to the realm of sanity. When the bubble burst, those who had mocked him were wiped out. His patience was revealed not as ignorance but as a superior form of wisdom. His inaction was shown to be the most powerful action he could have taken. This single contrast, the frenetic, destructive action of AOL Time Warner versus the disciplined, wealth-creating inaction of Warren Buffett, is the central lesson of this entire investigation. It reveals a fundamental truth about high-stakes decision-making. The game is not won by the player who makes the most moves. It is won by the player who makes the fewest mistakes. And the systematic avoidance of mistakes is a skill. It is a discipline. It is a mental operating system that can be learned, installed, and executed. That system is what we are here to deconstruct. Its official name is the Circle of Competence. It is the true foundation of Buffett's empire, the master algorithm that governs every decision he makes. It is a simple concept on the surface, yet its profound implications and the psychological fortitude required to execute it are what separate the legends from the footnotes of history. We are about to embark on a deep dive into the human mind, into the evolutionary and neurological wiring that makes the cult of action so seductive and so dangerous. We will explore the cognitive biases that push us toward motion and away from reason. Then, we will build from the ground up the entire framework of the Circle of Competence. We will not just define it, we will give you the blueprint to construct your own, to identify your unique areas of expertise, and to build an unbreachable wall around them. We will analyze, in excruciating detail, the legendary successes and the painful failures of Buffett's career through this single, powerful lens. And finally, we will show you how to expand this concept beyond investing, to weaponize it in your career, your business, and your life, transforming it from an investment strategy into a universal operating system for eliminating error and maximizing your long-term potential. Forget the hustle, forget the grind, prepare to learn the art of strategic inaction, prepare to build your too hard pile, prepare to deconstruct the single most important mental model for wealth creation on the planet. This is the first principle, everything else comes after. The journey into the mind of Warren Buffett begins not with what he does, but with what he so masterfully, so brilliantly, and so profitably refuses to do. Welcome to the antidote to the cult of action. To truly understand the power of Buffett's system, we must first diagnose the disease it is designed to cure. The human compulsion for action is not a simple character flaw or a bad habit picked up in a hyper-productive society. It is a deep-seated evolutionary artifact, a piece of cognitive software hardwired into our DNA for survival on the plains of the Serengeti, not for navigating the complexities of the stock market or the modern boardroom. This is what psychologists call the action bias. It is our brain's default setting. When faced with ambiguity or threat, do something. Anything. This instinct served our ancestors well. If you hear a rustle in the tall grass, it is far better to run first and ask questions later. The ancestor who paused to analyze the specific species of predator was quickly removed from the gene pool. The one who bolted at every gust of wind, while perhaps jumpy, survived to pass on his genes. The cost of a false positive, running when there was no danger, was minimal, a few wasted calories. The cost of a false negative, staying put when a lion was approaching, was absolute. Our brains are therefore optimized for type 1 errors, false positives, over type 2 errors, false negatives. We are built to act, not to wait. This ancient wiring hums beneath the surface of our modern lives, creating a constant, low-grade pressure to intervene, to tinker, to adjust. In the world of investing, this manifests as the constant urge to check your portfolio, to sell a stock that's down, to buy one that's soaring, to rebalance, to hedge, to do something in response to the endless stream of news and market noise. The financial media industry is a multi-billion-dollar machine built almost entirely to stimulate and profit from this bias. They don't sell information. They sell the illusion of control that comes from taking action based on that information. The same bias corrupts corporate strategy. A CEO who presides over a period of quiet, steady, profitable growth is often seen as a staid caretaker. The one who initiates bold acquisitions, sweeping reorganizations, and dramatic pivots is hailed as a, quote, visionary and a, quote, transformational leader, even if those actions, like the AOL-Time Warner merger, ultimately destroy value. The rewards, both social and financial, are heavily skewed towards activity. We celebrate the swashbuckling dealmaker, not the patient capital allocator. We are addicted to the narrative of action, and our brains reinforce this addiction with a powerful chemical cocktail. Every time you complete a task, no matter how small, sending an email, making a trade, scheduling a meeting, your brain releases a small hit of dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reward. This creates a feedback loop. Action leads to a chemical reward, which encourages more action. We become, in a very real sense, addicted to being busy. We chase the dopamine hit of checking items off a to-do list, often without pausing to ask if those items were the right things to do in the first place. This neurological reality is what makes Buffett's approach so difficult and so powerful. His ability to endure long periods of inaction is not a sign of laziness. It is an act of profound neurological warfare against his own instincts. He has effectively rewired his brain to derive a greater reward from the discipline of waiting for the perfect opportunity than from the cheap, fleeting dopamine hit of constant activity. He has inverted the evolutionary script. While our brains are programmed to fear the cost of a false negative, missing an opportunity, Buffett's is relentlessly focused on the catastrophic, often irreversible, cost of a false positive, acting on a bad idea. This cognitive inversion is the cornerstone of his entire philosophy. He understands that in the world of long-term compounding, the greatest threat is not missing the next big thing, but losing a significant portion of what you already have. As he famously says, rule number 1, never lose money. Rule number 2, never forget rule number 1. This isn't a clever quip. It's a direct articulation of his fight against the action bias. The only way to truly obey rule number 1 is to act with extreme prejudice, to say no to 1,000 good ideas in order to say yes to one truly great one. The hidden costs of hyperactivity, the debris left in the wake of the action bias, are staggering when you begin to quantify them. The first is decision fatigue. The human brain, like any muscle, has a finite capacity for high-quality decision-making in a given day. Every minor decision, every trade, every email, every strategic tweak draws down this precious resource. A mind cluttered with constant, low-stakes activity has no cognitive bandwidth left for the few decisions that truly matter. The hyperactive investor, constantly reacting to market noise, has exhausted their mental capital by the time a true once-in-a-decade opportunity presents itself. They are too tired, too distracted, too bogged down in the minutiae to recognize the signal through the noise. Buffett, by contrast, structures his entire life to conserve this mental energy. His famously empty schedule is not an affectation, it is a defensive fortress against the trivial. By ruthlessly eliminating the non-essential, he ensures that when a major decision does arise, he can bring the full, unadulterated power of his intellect to bear on it. The second cost is the plague of unforced errors. In tennis, an unforced error is a mistake made by a player that is not caused by the opponent's skill. It is a self-inflicted wound. In business and investing, the vast majority of catastrophic losses are unforced errors. They are the result of straying from a proven strategy, of succumbing to emotion, of giving in to the pressure to act. The AOL-Time Warner merger was a textbook unforced error. No competitor forced them to do it. They were driven by their own internal anxieties and hubris. A disciplined adherence to a simple, pre-committed strategy is the only antidote. By defining a clear set of rules and refusing to deviate from them, you eliminate the possibility of making mistakes, driven by the emotional whims of the moment. The third and most insidious cost is opportunity cost. This is the one the cult of action completely fails to grasp. Every dollar, every hour, every unit of mental energy you commit to a pretty good opportunity is a dollar, hour, and unit of energy that cannot be committed to the truly magnificent one that might be just around the corner. The hyperactive dealmaker who does 10 mediocre deals a year has deployed all their resources. The patient allocator who does nothing for 3 years and then commits everything to one perfect asymmetric bet will, over the long run, achieve results that are not just better, but of a completely different magnitude. Patience is not just a virtue in this model, it is a form of stored potential energy. Cash, for Buffett, is not a lazy asset, it is an option on future opportunity. It is the ammunition you keep dry for the day the perfect hunt presents itself. This deep understanding of the human machine's flaws, the action bias, the dopamine feedback loop, decision fatigue, unforced errors, and opportunity cost, is what led Buffett to the conclusion that a defensive strategy was the ultimate offensive weapon. He realized he could not win by outsmarting everyone all the time. The world is too complex, the future too uncertain. But he could win by simply not being stupid. He could win by building a system designed to protect him from his own worst instincts. That system, born from a lifetime of observation and a profound sense of intellectual humility, is the Circle of Competence. It is the elegant, powerful solution to the messy, irrational, and deeply human problem of the action bias. It is the fortress he built to defend himself from the most dangerous person in his financial life, himself. Now, let us move from the diagnosis of the problem to the deconstruction of the solution. Let's lay the first stone of that fortress. The genesis of every great philosophy can often be traced back to a moment of painful, searing, and unforgettable failure. The Circle of Competence was not a concept that sprung fully formed from the mind of a young Warren Buffett. It was forged in the crucible of his own mistakes, a lesson paid for with capital and, more importantly, with the sting of being wrong. To truly understand the framework, we must first appreciate the experiences that made it necessary. One of the earliest and most formative of these experiences was his investment in a Sinclair gas station. As a young man, flush with the initial success of his early ventures, Buffett partnered with a friend to buy a service station. On the surface, it seemed like a simple, understandable business. You buy gasoline at a wholesale price, you sell it at a retail price, and you pocket the difference. But Buffett quickly learned that the surface-level understanding was a dangerous illusion. He had failed to account for a critical, unseen variable: the competitive landscape. Directly across the street was a much larger, more aggressive Texaco station. The moment Buffett and his partner tried to make a decent profit margin, the Texaco station would slash its prices, forcing them to follow suit or lose all their customers. They were trapped in a brutal price war with a competitor who had superior scale and staying power. They were constantly busy, constantly working, but never truly profitable. The business bled money. Buffett, the man who would later build an empire on the concept of a competitive moat, had invested in a business with no moat at all. He was in a leaky rowboat in the middle of a naval battle. The experience taught him a crucial lesson. Understanding what a business does is not the same as understanding how it competes and wins. The simple mechanics of the gas station were easy to grasp. The complex dynamics of its specific competitive environment were not. He had mistaken familiarity for competence. An even more profound and famous lesson came from the very company that would become his legendary investment vehicle, Berkshire Hathaway. When Buffett first invested in Berkshire, it was a struggling New England textile manufacturer. He bought into it believing the stock was cheap, a classic cigar butt investment, a discarded company with one last puff of value left in it. He understood the numbers. He could calculate the liquidation value of the looms and the factory buildings. He was competent in the mathematics of asset valuation, but he was not competent in the economics of the textile industry itself. He failed to appreciate the brutal, unstoppable force of global competition. Low-cost manufacturers overseas were systematically dismantling the American textile industry. It was a business in terminal decline, a horse and buggy whip manufacturer at the dawn of the automobile. No matter how brilliantly his management team operated the mills, they were swimming against an economic tide of historic power. He was pouring capital and energy into a business that was fundamentally broken. For years he fought it, trying to turn the tide. It was, in his own words, a colossal mistake, one that cost him and his partners dearly in terms of wasted time and opportunity cost. The immense capital he poured into propping up the dying textile business could have been deployed into the wonderful growing businesses he was beginning to discover. The pain of this experience, the sheer grinding difficulty of trying to get a good result out of a bad business, became the bedrock of his new philosophy. He learned that it's far better to buy a wonderful company at a fair price than a fair company at a wonderful price. More importantly, he learned that the most crucial single decision an investor makes is choosing the right business to be in. The mistake was not in his financial analysis, but in his business analysis. He had stepped outside his nascent circle of competence. These failures, and others like them, forced Buffett to perform a ruthless intellectual inventory. He had to abandon the arrogant notion that a high IQ and a willingness to work hard were enough to succeed in any domain. He had to accept the profound and humbling truth that the world is divided into two distinct categories: things you can understand with a high degree of certainty, and everything else. The first category, he realized, was incredibly small. The second was infinitely large. The secret to success, he concluded, was not to try to expand the first category, but to have the discipline to identify its boundaries with absolute honesty and never, ever stray beyond them. This is the Circle of Competence. It is a mental model that defines the boundary between your genuine, hard-won expertise and the vast ocean of your ignorance. Inside the circle are the businesses, industries, and subjects that you understand with deep, intimate, and practical knowledge. You understand their products, their competitive advantages, their customers, their economic characteristics, and the key variables that will determine their future success. You can reasonably predict what they will look like in 5, 10, or 20 years. Outside the circle is everything else. It includes industries that are too complex, too new, too subject to rapid technological change, or simply outside your life's experience. It does not matter if these industries are exciting or growing rapidly. It doesn't matter if everyone else is getting rich from them. If you do not understand them with the same depth and certainty as the subjects inside your circle, you are forbidden from playing. The goal is not to have the biggest circle. As Buffett himself has said, the size of that circle is not very important. Knowing its boundaries, however, is vital. A person with a small but sharply defined circle who operates strictly within it will vastly outperform a person with a much larger but hazier circle. Why? Because the person who knows their boundaries knows when to say, "I don't know." They know when to put an idea in the too hard pile. The person with the fuzzy boundaries is a danger to themselves. They suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect, A cognitive bias whereby people with low ability at a task overestimate their ability. They don't know what they don't know, and that is where catastrophic error is born. They mistake their surface-level familiarity with the gas station business for true competence in its competitive dynamics. They mistake their competence in asset valuation for competence in the textile industry's economics. This framework is, at its core, an exercise in radical intellectual honesty. It requires you to confront the limits of your own knowledge, to trade the ego gratification of having an opinion on everything for the quiet power of being an expert in a few things. This is the great filter, the master algorithm that Buffett uses to process the world. Before he even begins to analyze a company's financials or management, he asks one simple question: is this business inside my circle of competence? If the answer is a clear, unhesitating yes, he proceeds. If the answer is no, or even maybe, the analysis stops immediately. The company goes directly into the too hard pile. No exceptions, no taking a flyer, no well this time it's different. The discipline is absolute. This initial filtering step eliminates over 99% of all possible investment opportunities, saving him an immense amount of time and cognitive energy. It allows him to focus all of his intellectual firepower on the tiny sliver of opportunities where he has a genuine sustainable competitive advantage, the advantage of superior understanding. This is the system that grew out of the ashes of his mistakes. It is a defense mechanism born of pain, a discipline forged in the fire of failure. It is the simple, profound, and non-negotiable starting point for every decision he makes. Now let us move from the why to the how. How does one actually go about defining this circle with the intellectual rigor it requires? This is not a casual exercise. It is a deep, ongoing process of self-interrogation and knowledge acquisition. We will now build the blueprint for constructing your own circle, pillar by pillar. Constructing your circle of competence is not a weekend project or a simple thought exercise. It is the life's work of a serious thinker. It requires a level of self-awareness and intellectual honesty that most people find deeply uncomfortable. But for those who undertake the process with rigor, the rewards are immeasurable. It is the process of building your own intellectual fortress, one stone at a time. The first and most critical stage of this construction is what I call the audit of acquired knowledge. You must sit down and map out, with brutal honesty, the landscape of your own mind. The goal is to separate the hills of genuine expertise from the vast, flat plains of mere familiarity. Most people's knowledge map is a dangerous illusion. They believe they have a broad, diverse portfolio of expertise, when in reality, they have a thin veneer of surface-level information spread across dozens of topics, acquired from headlines, podcasts, and casual conversations. This is not knowledge, it is trivia. And in the world of high-stakes decisions, trivia is toxic. True competence is not about knowing a little about a lot. It is about knowing a tremendous amount about a very small number of things. So how do you conduct this audit? You must become your own Socratic interrogator. Take a sheet of paper and list out the industries, subjects, and skills where you believe you have some level of expertise. Now, for each item on that list, you must subject it to a ruthless cross-examination. Here are the questions you must ask, and you must answer them with verifiable evidence, not just feelings or self-assurance. Question 1. Could I give a 90-minute lecture on this subject to a room of intelligent graduate students with no preparation and hold their attention? Could I confidently field their most challenging questions? If the answer is no, your knowledge is likely superficial. You might be familiar with the topic, but you lack the deep, structured understanding that constitutes real competence. Question 2. Could I engage in a rigorous debate on this subject with a world-class expert and not be exposed as a charlatan? Could I understand the nuances of their arguments, identify the weak points, and articulate a coherent counterposition based on my own deep understanding? This question tests the robustness of your knowledge. True expertise is not fragile. It has been pressure-tested against opposing viewpoints and has survived. Question 3. Do I understand the history of this field? Do I know who the key figures were? what the major turning points were, and what the great debates of the past were. Competence requires historical context. Without understanding how a field has evolved, you cannot possibly understand its present state or anticipate its future trajectory. A person who claims to understand the tech industry but knows nothing of the rise and fall of Digital Equipment Corporation or the browser wars of the 1990s is missing a critical dimension of knowledge. Question 4. Do I actively read the dense, technical, and often boring primary source material of this field? For investing, this means reading annual reports, 10-kilosecond and trade journals, not just analyst reports and financial news articles. For another industry, it might be scientific papers, legal documents, or engineering schematics. A reliance on secondary, filtered information is a red flag for a lack of true competence. You must be willing to go to the source and grapple with the raw, uninterpreted data. Question 5, and perhaps the most important. Have I had direct, practical, in-the-trenches experience in this field? Have I ever earned a paycheck in this industry? Have I built something, managed something, or been held accountable for results in this domain? There is a profound difference between academic knowledge and the visceral, tacit knowledge that comes from hands-on experience. Buffett understands the insurance business not just because he has read about it, but because he owns Geico and has spent decades immersed in the practical realities of risk, float, and underwriting. This audit is a humbling process. If you are honest with yourself, your long list of supposed competencies will likely shrink to just 2 or 3 items. This is not a sign of failure. It is the first sign of true wisdom. You have just cleared away the fog and identified the solid ground upon which you can build. This small, well-defined area is the foundation of your circle of competence. Everything else, all those other interesting topics and exciting industries, goes into the too hard pile. Now, with this foundational ground identified, we can begin to build upon it. True, sustainable competence rests on 3 essential pillars. You must have all 3 for your circle to be sound. The first pillar is maniacal interest. You cannot become a true expert in something you are not genuinely, deeply, and obsessively curious about. The sheer volume of reading and thinking required to achieve mastery is so immense that only a burning, intrinsic passion can sustain the effort over the long run. If you are pursuing knowledge in a field solely for extrinsic reasons, because you think it will make you money or because it's a hot trend, you will inevitably be outcompeted by the person who is doing it for the love of the game. The person who finds reading about the history of railroad gauges or the chemical properties of a specific polymer to be genuinely fascinating has a massive, sustainable advantage. This is why Buffett and his partner Charlie Munger so often emphasize the importance of reading. They are not just gathering information, they are satisfying a profound, lifelong curiosity. Munger's famous line, "I have known no wise people who didn't read all the time," is not an exaggeration. Their maniacal interest fuels a relentless learning engine. When you evaluate the items inside your circle, ask yourself, do I voluntarily and eagerly consume information about this topic in my free time? Do I find myself thinking about its problems in the shower? If the answer is no, you must be wary. Your competence may be brittle, built on the temporary foundation of willpower rather than the bedrock of passion. The second pillar is verifiable experience. This is the practical, hands-on application of your knowledge that we touched on in the audit. It is the bridge between theory and reality. You can read every book ever written about swimming, but until you jump in the pool, you are not a swimmer. Experience is the great teacher of nuance, the thing that cannot be learned from a textbook. It's the visceral understanding of a company's culture, the intuitive feel for a market's rhythm, the hard-won knowledge of what can go wrong in a supply chain because you have seen it go wrong. Buffett's early years running his investment partnerships, where he was directly responsible for every decision and every dollar, provided him with an invaluable trove of verifiable experience. He wasn't just analyzing businesses, he was an owner with all the accountability that entails. When defining your circle, you must heavily weight the areas where you have this kind of earned, real-world knowledge. Your profession, your serious, long-term hobbies, or a business you have run are the most likely candidates for true competence. A doctor has a circle of competence in healthcare. An engineer has one in their specific domain of engineering. A career software developer has one in technology. It is a fatal error to believe that success in one domain automatically confers competence in another. A brilliant heart surgeon is likely to be a novice investor, and vice versa. The third pillar is a commitment to lifelong learning. A circle of competence is not a static object. It is a living, breathing thing that must be nurtured, updated, and defended. The world is constantly changing. Industries evolve, technologies disrupt, and competitive advantages erode. The competence you have today can become obsolete tomorrow. The only way to maintain the integrity of your circle is to be a perpetual student. This means constantly seeking out disconfirming evidence, information that challenges your existing beliefs. It means reading the arguments of the smartest people who disagree with you. It means studying the failures in your field as much, if not more, than the successes. Charlie Munger's concept of a latticework of mental models is the ultimate expression of this pillar. He argues that to truly understand a subject, you must come at it from multiple angles, using the big ideas from all the major disciplines: physics, biology, psychology, history, and so on. This multidisciplinary approach creates a rich, robust, and resilient understanding that is far less prone to the man with a hammer syndrome, where every problem looks like a nail. The construction and maintenance of your circle of competence is therefore a dynamic process. It begins with a ruthless audit to establish your foundation. It is then built up by the three pillars of maniacal interest, verifiable experience, and a commitment to lifelong learning. And it is defended by the unwavering discipline to know where the perimeter lies and to never, ever venture beyond it. This is not a system for dabblers, it is a system for masters. It is the conscious choice to trade the illusion of broad knowledge for the reality of deep wisdom. And in that trade lies the entire secret to avoiding catastrophic error. Once the walls of your circle of competence are established, the too-hard pile becomes its most crucial and functional component. This is not a mere wastebasket for bad ideas. It is an active, powerful, and offensive tool. It is the mechanism through which the entire philosophy is operationalized. To the outside world, it looks like a simple act of discarding. To the master practitioner, it is an act of profound strategic allocation, the allocation of their single most precious resource, attention. Let's first dissect the psychology of what makes the too-hard pile so difficult for most people to embrace. It requires the courage to utter the three most powerful and ego-threatening words in the English language. I don't know. Our society, our educational system, and our corporate structures are all designed to punish the admission of ignorance. From the classroom to the boardroom, we are expected to have an opinion, a forecast, a confident answer. The expert who says, "I have no view on that," is often seen as weak or incompetent. The politician who admits uncertainty is seen as unleaderlike. The CEO who tells Wall Street analysts that a certain trend is simply too complex to predict is penalized. We are incentivized to feign certainty. This creates a world of what the essayist Nassim Taleb calls empty suits. People in positions of authority who project an aura of knowledge but are, in reality, simply skilled at avoiding the admission of ignorance. They develop a talent for using jargon, complex-sounding language, and vague prognostications to create a fog of intellectual authority. The too-hard pile is a direct assault on this entire charade. It is the physical or mental manifestation of a commitment to intellectual honesty. When Buffett says he doesn't understand the long-term competitive dynamics of a new technology company, he is not being falsely modest. He is making a clear, definitive statement about the boundaries of his knowledge. He is choosing the discomfort of admitting ignorance over the catastrophic risk of acting on a false sense of confidence. This act has a powerful secondary effect. It builds immense credibility. When a person who so readily and frequently admits what they don't know finally makes a definitive statement about something they do know, That statement carries immense weight. When Buffett finally decides to invest in a company after years of passing on thousands of others, the world pays attention, because they know that decision has passed through the most rigorous intellectual filter on the planet. The ultimate cautionary tale of what happens when brilliant people lack a too hard pile is the spectacular collapse of long-term capital management in 1998. LTCM was a hedge fund founded by a dream team of financial superstars, including John Meriwether, the legendary bond trader from Salomon Brothers, and two Nobel Prize-winning economists, Myron Scholes and Robert C. Merton. Their intelligence was, by any objective measure, stratospheric. They had literally written the textbooks on derivatives pricing and financial modeling. Their strategy was to use complex mathematical models to identify tiny temporary pricing discrepancies in global bond markets, and then place massive, highly leveraged bets on those discrepancies converging. For a few years it worked spectacularly. They generated returns that were the envy of the financial world. They believed they had created a scientific, infallible money-making machine. Their fatal flaw was hubris. They believed their intellectual horsepower was so great that nothing was too hard for them to understand or model. Their circle of competence in their own minds was nearly infinite. They built models that assumed a certain level of market volatility and rational behavior. They had no too hard pile for events that fell outside their models, elegant assumptions. In the summer of 1998, Russia defaulted on its domestic debt, an event their models had deemed virtually impossible. This triggered a global flight to safety, a panic that caused all their carefully calibrated pricing discrepancies to diverge violently instead of converge. All of their positions went against them at once. Their leverage, which had been the engine of their success, became the instrument of their doom. The fund lost $4.6 billion in less than 4 months and was on the brink of a collapse so catastrophic that it threatened to take the entire global financial system down with it, forcing the U.S. Federal Reserve to orchestrate a massive bailout. The Nobel laureates had been humbled. Their intricate models were revealed to be brittle instruments, incapable of accounting for the wild, unpredictable, and often irrational nature of human fear. They had made the classic mistake that Buffett's system is designed to prevent. They had mistaken their competence in one domain, mathematics, for competence in another, predicting the full range of human behavior under extreme duress. They had no intellectual humility, no too hard pile for the unknowable. So how does one build and manage this pile in a practical sense? It is a process of rapid, ruthless triage. As information and opportunities flow towards you, you must become an expert at pattern recognition, quickly identifying the telltale signs of a business or situation that belongs outside your circle. Sign number 1. The need for a spreadsheet to make it look good. If an investment opportunity requires a complex financial model with dozens of assumptions about future growth, margins, and market share to justify it, it's probably too hard. The truly great opportunities, as Buffett has often said, are simple. They should scream at you. The math should be back of the envelope. You shouldn't need to project earnings out to the 5th decimal place to see the value. A dependence on a spreadsheet is often a sign that you're trying to force the numbers to tell you the story you want to hear, rather than letting the simple, powerful economics of the business speak for themselves. Sign number 2. Rapid, unpredictable change. Any industry where the competitive landscape can be fundamentally altered in 18 months by a new technology or a new competitor is, for a long-term investor, a minefield. This is why Buffett historically avoided the technology sector. It wasn't that he thought the companies were bad. It was that he could not, with any degree of certainty, predict what the industry would look like in 10 or 20 years. Who would be the winners? Who would be the losers? The range of outcomes was simply too wide. This goes directly into the too hard pile. He seeks out businesses that are deliberately, wonderfully boring. Businesses that sell products that people have been buying for decades and will likely be buying for decades to come, like Coca-Cola, See's Candies, or American Express. The future of chewing gum is easier to predict than the future of cloud computing. Sign number 3, a dependence on a single, brilliant individual. If a company's success seems to be tied to the genius of one visionary founder or CEO, it is a fragile business. What happens if that person leaves, gets sick, or makes a major mistake? Buffett prefers to invest in businesses that are so wonderful that, in his words, any idiot can run them. The strength should be in the business model itself, the brand, the market position, the low-cost production, not in the wizardry of the person at the helm. This is a robust, institutionalized advantage, not a fleeting, human one. By developing this rapid filtering mechanism, you can process an immense amount of information with minimal cognitive effort. 99% of it gets tossed onto the too hard pile within the first few minutes of examination. This is the great secret of Buffett's productivity. He is not a speed reader, he is a speed rejector. This frees up his entire day to do what truly adds value, thinking deeply about the 1% of opportunities that have passed through this rigorous initial filter and fall squarely within his circle of competence. The final, and perhaps most psychologically challenging aspect of the too hard pile is learning to endure the emotional pain of watching things you have discarded become wild successes. During the dot-com bubble, as Buffett sat on his hands, he had to watch people all around him get fabulously wealthy by investing in the very companies he had thrown onto his too hard pile. He was publicly ridiculed. He underperformed the market for a sustained period. This requires an almost superhuman level of emotional discipline and a deep, unshakable faith in your process. You must be willing to look foolish in the short term to be solvent in the long term. You must anchor your self-worth to the quality of your decision-making process, not to the random, short-term outcomes that the market throws up. The too hard pile, then, is far more than a simple organizational tool. It is a declaration of intellectual independence. It is a shield against the noise of the world. It is a formal mechanism for practicing humility and conserving your most precious asset. It is the operational engine of the Circle of Competence, the physical act that enforces the mental discipline. To master it is to master the art of saying no, and in a world of infinite distraction, that is the ultimate superpower. To truly cement our understanding of the Circle of Competence, we must move from the abstract to the concrete. We will now perform a deep, forensic analysis of 3 pivotal decisions in Warren Buffett's career, examining each one through the powerful lens of this mental model. We will dissect a masterclass in staying within the circle, a painful lesson in straying from it, and a legendary example of the discipline required to not act at all. This trilogy of case studies will reveal the practical, real-world application of the entire framework. Our first case study is the quintessential inside the circle investment, a decision so perfect it has become the stuff of legend, the acquisition of See's Candies in 1972. On the surface, it seemed like a small, unexciting purchase. See's was a family-owned chocolatier based in California. It was not a high-growth technology company. It was a simple, old-fashioned business. But for Buffett and Munger, it was a revelation. It was the first time they shifted their strategy from buying fair companies at wonderful prices, the cigar butts, to buying wonderful companies at fair prices. And See's was, to them, a truly wonderful company that fell squarely within their rapidly solidifying circle of competence. Let's break down why. First, the business was ridiculously simple to understand. They made chocolates in a factory and sold them through their own retail stores. There were no complex patents, no arcane technologies, no indecipherable financial derivatives. Buffett could understand every single step of the business model, from raw materials to final sale. He knew where the money came from and where it went. There was no black box. This satisfied the most basic test of competence: deep, intuitive comprehension. Second, and more importantly, See's had a formidable, albeit invisible, competitive moat. The moat is Buffett's term for a sustainable competitive advantage that protects a business from competitors, much like a moat protects a castle. The moat around See's was not a patent or a low-cost production process. It was a powerful brand that resided in the minds of its customers. In California, giving a box of See's candies as a gift had become a deeply ingrained social ritual. It was a sign of affection and good taste. A man going to meet his new girlfriend's parents for the first time would bring a box of See's. It was the default choice. This brand loyalty gave See's something extraordinary: pricing power. The company could raise its prices year after year to account for inflation, and customers would barely notice, let alone switch to a cheaper generic brand. The emotional connection to the product completely overwhelmed the rational price consideration. The few extra dollars for a box of See's was a tiny price to pay for the social insurance of giving a well-regarded gift. This concept of a psychological moat, a brand-based competitive advantage, was something Buffett and Munger understood intimately. It was a qualitative factor that didn't show up on a balance sheet, but was more valuable than any factory or piece of equipment. Their competence was not in candy making. It was in understanding the psychology of consumer behavior. Third, the future of the business was highly predictable. While Buffett couldn't predict the future of the computer industry, he could predict with a very high degree of certainty that people in California would still be buying See's candies in 10, 20, and 30 years. The business was not susceptible to massive technological disruption. Human traditions and the desire for high-quality, affordable luxuries change very, very slowly. This predictability allowed Buffett to pay a fair price for the business, knowing that the long-term earnings power of the company would provide a handsome return. He wasn't betting on a heroic product launch or a market revolution. He was betting on the continuation of a decades-long trend. The purchase of See's candies was a masterstroke. Buffett and Munger paid $25 million for the company. Since then, it has generated over $2 billion in pre-tax earnings for Berkshire Hathaway, capital that Buffett was able to reallocate into other wonderful businesses. But more than the financial return, See's was an intellectual breakthrough. It taught them the immense value of intangible assets like brands and the power of a business that can grow while requiring very little additional capital. It perfectly defined the kind of business they were looking for and became the archetype for future acquisitions like Coca-Cola and American Express. It was a testament to the power of operating within a circle defined not by industry jargon, but by a deep understanding of basic business economics and human nature. Now we must turn to the other side of the coin. For every See's candies, there is a cautionary tale that reinforces the importance of the circle's boundaries. The most significant and painful of these in Buffett's career was the acquisition of Dexter Shoe Company in 1993. Buffett has publicly called this his worst deal ever, not because of the amount of money lost, but because of the fundamental error in judgment it represented. It was a catastrophic failure of the Circle of Competence model, and its lessons are profound. On the surface, Dexter Shoe looked like another See's candies. It was an all-American company based in Maine, manufacturing high-quality, durable shoes. It had a strong brand, a history of profitability, and a reputation for excellence. Buffett loved the story. He loved the management. He believed it had a durable competitive advantage. He was so confident, in fact, that he didn't pay for Dexter with cash. He paid for it with Berkshire Hathaway stock, a decision that would amplify the pain of the mistake exponentially. So what went wrong? Where did Buffett misjudge the perimeter of his circle? He correctly understood the business of making and selling shoes. He understood the brand and the distribution. What he fatally misunderstood was the durability of Dexter's competitive moat. The moat that he thought was a thick stone wall was in reality a thin line drawn in the sand, about to be washed away by a tsunami of global competition. At the time, the global trade landscape was undergoing a seismic shift. Low-cost shoe manufacturers in developing countries were entering the market with products that were nearly as good as Dexter's, but at a fraction of the price. Dexter's competitive advantage was its domestic manufacturing and its reputation for quality. But this advantage was only sustainable as long as there was a significant barrier to foreign competition, either through tariffs or a massive gap in quality. That barrier was disintegrating. Buffett, whose competence was primarily in understanding domestic American consumer brands, failed to fully appreciate the scale and speed of this global economic force. He had analyzed the company in isolation but had failed to analyze the tectonic plates shifting underneath the entire industry. His circle included understanding a brand's power over an American consumer, but it did not, at that time, include a deep, nuanced understanding of global supply chains and the brutal economics of international manufacturing competition. The result was a complete and utter disaster. Within a few years, Dexter's competitive advantage was gone. The business began to hemorrhage money. The brand that seemed so durable was unable to compete with the flood of cheaper imports. The company, which Buffett had valued at $433 million, eventually went to zero. The entire investment was a write-off. And because he had paid with Berkshire stock, the mistake was magnified. The shares he had given to the owners of Dexter would, over the next 2 decades, become worth billions of dollars. He hadn't just lost the initial purchase price, he had lost all the future compounding of that capital. It was an opportunity cost of staggering proportions. The Dexter shoe failure is a masterclass in the subtleties of defining your circle. It shows that competence is not a blunt instrument. You can be an expert in 95% of a business's variables, but be completely undone by the 5% you don't understand. Buffett understood the company, but he didn't understand the industry's vulnerability. He saw the castle, but failed to see the army massing on the horizon. This mistake taught him a painful but invaluable lesson, one that he has carried with him ever since. A seemingly durable competitive advantage is worthless if it is susceptible to a single, fatal flaw. You must not only understand why the business is good today, you must have a deep understanding of all the forces that could kill it tomorrow. After the Dexter fiasco, Buffett and Munger became far more focused on businesses whose moats were not just strong, but also resistant to the forces of global technological and economic change. The Dexter shoe story is not a story of stupidity. It is a story of hubris. It is the story of a brilliant mind, stepping just 1 foot outside the line of his true deep competence and falling off a cliff. It serves as a permanent, painful reminder that the boundaries of the circle are not suggestions. They are non-negotiable, and the price for violating them is absolute. It is the scar that proves the wisdom of the system. Our final case study is not about an action, but about a deliberate and prolonged period of inaction. It is perhaps the most powerful demonstration of the circle of competence as a psychological shield, Buffett's famous refusal to participate in the dot-com bubble of the late 1990s. This episode is the ultimate testament to the emotional discipline required by the framework. From roughly 1995 to early 2000, the world went mad. The rise of the commercial internet created a stock market frenzy, unlike anything seen before. Companies with no revenue, no profits, and often no coherent business plan were achieving market capitalizations in the billions of dollars. A new paradigm, it was said, had been born. Old metrics like earnings and book value were declared obsolete. The new economy was all about eyeballs, network effects, and first-mover advantage. During this period, Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway looked like relics. His disciplined, value-oriented approach was a joke. As technology stocks doubled, tripled, and quadrupled in value, Berkshire's stock languished. Financial media outlets ran cover stories asking, "What's wrong, Warren?" He was openly mocked as a man who had lost his touch, a brilliant investor who simply didn't get the new world of technology. The social and psychological pressure on him to abandon his principles and join the party was unimaginable. His own shareholders were restless. His friends were getting rich. Every instinct in the human brain, the fear of missing out, FOMO, the desire for social proof, the pull of envy, was screaming at him to act. And yet, he did nothing. He continued to buy insurance companies, furniture stores, and other boring businesses, while the world chased the digital dream. Why? Because he was rigorously, unflinchingly, and publicly adhering to his circle of competence. He looked at these new technology and internet companies, and he could not answer the fundamental questions his discipline demanded. He could not, with any certainty, tell you what the world of e-commerce or internet portals would look like in 10 years. He could not identify which of the hundreds of competing companies had a durable, long-term competitive advantage. He recognized the immense power of the internet as a societal force, but he could not translate that into a confident valuation of any single business within that ecosystem. It was a classic too-hard-pile situation. His decision was not a judgment on the technology itself. He was not a Luddite who thought the internet was a fad. He was an investor making an honest assessment of the limits of his own predictive abilities. In a 1999 speech at Sun Valley, at the absolute peak of the mania, he laid out his reasoning with perfect clarity. He used the analogy of the automobile industry. He acknowledged that at the turn of the 20th century, it was obvious that the automobile was going to change the world. But of the 2,000 auto companies that existed in the early days, only a handful would survive. How, he asked, would you have known in 1910 to pick General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler out of that chaotic field? And even if you had, the brutal competition and capital requirements of the industry would have made it a terrible long-term investment for most of its history. He saw the internet boom as the same situation, a world-changing technology but an investment minefield. He was admitting without shame that he lacked the competence to pick the winners. This was not a failure of intelligence, it was a triumph of discipline. It required an iron will to sit by and watch others get rich, to endure public ridicule, and to trust your own process over the deafening roar of the crowd. He anchored his sense of self-worth not to his short-term performance relative to the market, but to his long-term adherence to his intellectual principles. Of course, we all know how the story ended. In March of 2000, the bubble burst. The Nasdaq Composite Index, which had peaked above 5,000, collapsed by nearly 80% over the next 2 years. Trillions of dollars of speculative wealth vanished. The new paradigm was revealed to be the same old speculative mania, dressed in digital clothes. And Warren Buffett, the dinosaur, was revealed to be the wisest man in the room. His patient, disciplined inaction had not only preserved Berkshire's capital, it had put him in the perfect position to provide liquidity to a terrified market, buying wonderful assets at bargain prices when blood was in the streets. This episode is the ultimate proof of the Circle of Competence model. It demonstrates that the framework's greatest value is not in helping you find the next great investment, but in preventing you from participating in the next great speculative bust. It is a system of error prevention. It is a psychological fortress that protects you from the most destructive forces in finance: envy, greed, and the madness of crowds. The trilogy of C's candies, Dexter's shoe, and the dot-com bubble provides a complete picture of the framework in action. C shows the immense rewards of staying firmly within your circle. Dexter shows the catastrophic cost of straying even slightly outside of it. And the dot-com bubble shows the superhuman discipline required to respect its boundaries in the face of immense social pressure. Together, they form the foundational narrative of Buffett's success, a career defined not by a handful of brilliant yeses, but by 100,000 disciplined noes. The true power of a great mental model is its universality. While the Circle of Competence was forged in the world of investing, its principles are not limited to the allocation of financial capital. It is a universal operating system for making high-stakes decisions and allocating your most precious non-renewable resources, your time, your energy, and your attention. To confine its use to your investment portfolio is to miss its greatest potential. Let's start with your career. The modern career path is a chaotic landscape of endless options, a constant pressure to acquire new skills, pivot to new industries, and climb a ladder that often leads to a place you don't want to be. The cult of action is rampant. People jump from job to job, chasing titles and marginal salary increases, accumulating a resume that is a mile wide and an inch deep. They are career dabblers, never staying in one place long enough to build true, deep, and defensible expertise. Applying the Circle of Competence to your career is a revolutionary act. It means making a conscious, deliberate choice to build your career around your small, well-defined area of genuine strength and maniacal interest. It means saying no to the shiny, distracting opportunities that lie outside that circle, even if they offer short-term rewards. The goal is not to be a jack of all trades, but to become so good in your specific niche that you cannot be ignored. It's about building a career moat. If you are a brilliant software engineer with a passion for data structures, your circle is not technology. It's far more specific. Your career strategy should be to go deeper and deeper into that niche, to become one of the top 100 people in the world at it. You should say no to the promotion that takes you into management if it pulls you away from your core competence. You should say no to the job at the hot startup that wants you to do marketing. You ruthlessly align your time and energy with the activities that widen and deepen your existing circle of strength. Over time, this creates a gravitational pull. Opportunities start coming to you. You become a destination for problems that only you can solve. You are no longer competing with thousands of generalists. You are in a category of one. This is how you build true career equity and negotiating power. The same logic applies to entrepreneurship. The landscape is littered with the corpses of startups that tried to be everything to everyone. The successful ones, more often than not, start by doing one thing incredibly well for a very specific customer. They define a tiny circle of competence, a niche market, a single problem, and they dominate it. Amazon did not start as the everything store. It started as the best place to buy books online. That was its initial circle. Only after achieving absolute mastery and dominance within that circle did Jeff Bezos begin to cautiously, systematically expand the perimeter. He earned the right to enter new arenas by first winning decisively in his chosen one. The model is also a powerful tool for personal relationships and partnerships. Think about choosing a co-founder for a business. You are not just looking for a smart, talented person. You are looking for someone whose circle of competence is complementary, not overlapping, with your own. If you are a brilliant product visionary, you don't need another product visionary. You need a brilliant operator or a master of sales and distribution. Together, your two well-defined circles create a much larger, more powerful Venn diagram. This is the logic that underpins the half-century partnership of Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. Buffett is a master of capital allocation and business analysis. Munger is a master of multidisciplinary thinking, psychology, and institutional architecture. They are not redundant, they are complementary. Their combined competence is vastly greater than the sum of its parts. Even in your health and personal development, the principle holds. The world bombards you with an endless array of fad diets, workout routines, and productivity hacks. The action bias tempts you to try all of them, to constantly switch, to tinker endlessly. The circle of competence approach would be to pick one simple, proven, sustainable system, a basic diet of whole foods, a consistent routine of compound exercises, and execute it with relentless consistency. You define your circle as mastery of the fundamentals, and you put all the fancy, complex, and unproven fads into the too hard pile. The goal is not to find the perfect, esoteric solution, but to master the simple, effective one. In essence, the circle of competence is a philosophy of life. It is a commitment to depth over breadth. It is a rejection of the siren song of the new in favor of the quiet power of the known. It is the understanding that true mastery and long-term success come from the compounding of a small, well-understood advantage over a very long period of time. And it brings us back to the great, unifying idea that underpins the entire worldview of Buffett and Munger. The concept of the circle of competence is the essential foundation, the ground upon which all other intellectual structures must be built. Charlie Munger is famous for his advocacy of building a latticework of mental models from all the major academic disciplines. But that latticework is useless, even dangerous, if it is not applied on solid ground. You cannot effectively apply a model from physics or psychology to an industry you do not fundamentally understand. You will misinterpret the variables, you will draw false analogies, and you will arrive at a conclusion that is precisely modeled but completely wrong. The circle of competence is the act of choosing your battlefield. It is the first, most critical, strategic decision. It is the filter that protects you from the 99% of battles you are destined to lose. It ensures that you only deploy your advanced mental weaponry, your latticework of models, on the terrain where you have an unfair advantage. So you've done the work. You have performed the ruthless audit of your knowledge. You have identified the pillars of your true, deep competence. You have built the fortress walls. You have committed to the unwavering discipline of operating exclusively within that defined battlefield, and you have built a massive too-hard pile to ruthlessly discard every opportunity that falls outside of it. This is the foundational act of intellectual warfare. This is how you avoid the catastrophic mistake. This is how you guarantee you stay in the game long enough for the power of compounding to work its magic. But now, a new, more profound question emerges. Once you are on the right battlefield, how do you win? How do you analyze the opportunities that lie inside your circle with a level of logic and rationality that is immune to error and emotion? Defining the circle is the defense. But what is the offense? Answering that question requires an even deeper level of cognitive architecture. It requires installing a superior operating system for decision-making. It requires what we call the cognitive trinity, a three-part mental system Buffett uses to dismantle risk, eliminate self-sabotage, and harness the unstoppable power of time itself. It's the powerful software that runs inside the fortress you have just built. To deconstruct that system, to understand the fortress of infallible logic, the antidote to self-sabotage, and the time-compounding engine, you must take the next logical step in this journey. It is the second piece of the blueprint for rewiring your mind. Click the video on your screen right now to begin that deconstruction.